Hi, it's Dr. Jenn Kennedy. I'm a sexologist and couples therapist. The Pleasure Project is about sex and relationships. That includes desire, dysfunction, dissatisfaction, exploration, toys, and trends. Sometimes I'll enlist other experts. Sometimes it'll just be me. We'll increase your insight and enhance your pleasure. So tune in. Let's be honest, most people think they're supposed to just feel desire. And when they don't, they assume something's wrong. In this episode, I'm joined by sex therapist Brooke Bralove to break that myth wide open. We talk about spontaneous desire, who actually experiences it, which is fewer people than you'd think, who really shows up for sex therapy, and why long-term sex doesn't stay interesting without a little intentional disruption. We discuss novelty, long-term couples patterns, and what it actually takes to get out of a sexual rut. Plus, Brooke shares how accelerated resolution therapy can help shift the deeper stuff that keeps people stuck. If your sex life feels a little predictable or a little too quiet, this episode is for you. So welcome back. My guest today is Brooke Bralove. She is a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist, and AASECT certified sex therapist. She is also a master accelerated resolution therapy practitioner and a Daring Way trained facilitator. Brooke specializes in helping adults and couples navigate anxiety, trauma, and sexual relationship challenges. Much of her work focuses on supporting women in letting go of perfectionism and moving towards greater authenticity, pleasure, and connection in their lives and relationships. She is particularly passionate about accelerated resolution therapy, which we're going to be talking about today. It's a brief treatment modality that uses bilateral eye movements to help resolve trauma and stored emotional responses connected to PTSD, anxiety, and depression. Today, we're talking about how sexual desire actually works in long-term relationships, while many couples think they're broken when they're actually normal, and how to reconnect with eroticism without pressure and performance. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's always fun to have a colleague that feels like we can actually just have a conversation and people get to be witness to it, because I feel like I've so many thoughts in my head and I'm like, oh, good, right? It's like, this is why
Yes,
we go to conferences too, I think, is
absolutely.
to have conversations about all this stuff that we do clinically and then get to actually discuss. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So, like, what first drew you into this work in particular, sex therapy specifically, and relationships?
So I got divorced at the age of 39 and ended up kind of having a sort of sexual, I would say, reawakening, sort of an awakening. Um, I certainly found an old self and a
Mm-hmm.
new self at the same time. And it was just very exciting to me. And so within about 2 years of my divorce, I, started down the AASECT certification route and have been doing sex therapy since, long before 2019, but I became certified in 2019. And it's been a really fun journey. I
Mm-hmm.
often say to people, my practice is just outside Washington, D.C. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll say, do you think I want to hear the 10th lobbyist or lawyer talk
Right.
about work stress?
Yeah.
Or do you think maybe it's fun to have a little sex therapy thrown in there? And so, of course, I do depression, anxiety, and kind of general psychotherapy, but sex therapy really does keep it more interesting. There's no doubt about it.
Well, and I would wager that many of those politicians and lawyers, they've got layered stuff, right? Their anxiety and their depression is interlinked with their intimacy issues and their sexuality and their, right? It's all commingled. And when you add that layer in, when they feel permission to talk about intimacy and sex, it's like, oh, it gets way more honest and interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I certainly, you know, I often tell people, who do you think are the most submissive people that I see?
It's high
It's
powered.
high powered white
Yes.
men who are mostly Republican. And those are the people who are wanting to be completely submissive, often humiliation, degradation, that kind of thing. And so, you know,
Mhm.
this is often how I talk about sex therapy is that many people are looking for balance in their lives. And kink can actually provide a really healthy if used right and,
Mhm.
ethically and consensually can be a really great way to bring people balance that they're not able, to find elsewhere. Again, if we talk about who wants to be submissive, in that way, there's another
Mhm.
group that really enjoys submission, and that's the working mom who does it all. So
Right.
she is the boss. She's the boss at work. She's
Yeah.
the boss of kids. She handles every single thing, all the mental load, and
Yeah.
she's exhausted. And in the
Yeah.
bedroom, she doesn't want to make any decisions whatsoever. And she wants someone to take full control. And again, I see that literally across the board of the people I work with.
Isn't it interesting? Like how when people come in, it's like I think like there's this perception that sex therapy is like in this container that is separate. It's almost like you go to, I don't know, a podiatrist to work on your foot. And it's like the foot isn't connected to the rest of the body. It's like, guys, your sex life is not your eyeball. Your sex life is connected to your attachment, it's connected to your history, it's connected, desire, and all of it is interconnected. So you can't look at this, in a separate thing. It's interconnected to all of it. And so to your point, right? The exhausted housewife or the powerful politician, right? It's part of everything else. And so of
Yeah, I do
course you have
agree
to look
with
at it in
you.
context.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. People kind of want to put sex therapy like over here, which is
Hmm.
why I'm shocked when there are so many couples therapists who've never done any sex
Yes.
therapy training.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, please tell me you're at least asking about it. And sometimes I'll see couples and it never came up. And I mean, that is just shocking to me, right? I mean, what makes romantic couples, different? They
Hmm.
are sexual with each other. That's usually a massive difference. And we
Yeah.
all kind of know that. And so if you have a couples therapist who's not ever talking about how things are going sexually, again, that's a problem. And here's what
Yeah.
happens is I don't know if you find this, but patients then get the message that it's not okay to bring it up, and so they don't. So many people I see will say, "Oh, I've got a great individual therapist. I've got a great couples therapist, but I don't feel comfortable talking about sex with her or him."
Yeah. Because they'll sort of hint at it. And then what I've heard is that they get redirected by the therapist, which is the signaling that this isn't what we talk about here. And clearly it's the therapist's discomfort. And so that was end of story. They didn't bring it up again. Right now I've got couples that I see that they still have a couples therapist, but they don't want to talk about sex to the couples therapist. And I'm like, why are you seeing this person? Right? It's like, come on. This is part of, especially, I mean, I'm a marriage and family therapist. Part of our title, right? You're an LCSW, but like marriage and family therapist, part of it is couples. And part of that to me is human sexuality. Like I can't believe, that. So yeah, I do think it's a big gap in the work that many therapists do. And so I always find it kind of fascinating that, yeah, that there's this gap and yet we're all having sex, but we're not talking about it and we're not recognizing sort of where it's happening and throughout the life cycle, how it's changing and affecting how we want to show up in our
Yeah.
partnerships.
Yeah, and I really do think what you're talking about too is so important because there's a way that again your sexuality gets kind of split off. And the whole idea of sex addiction, I feel like is so split off. That's your problem, you have an addiction. And I usually see what I call out of control sexual behaviors as often complete coping mechanisms to anxiety, depression, loneliness. It doesn't mean I'm not saying it's okay, but to not understand the need underneath it and to simply look at it as an addiction that needs to be, 100% abstinence, that also doesn't make sense. I mean, yes, you can abstain from things that are harming you and your marriage, for instance. But again, you've got to look at it in context of how is that serving the person or not serving them, and what are they trying to cope with? And I don't think it's fair to split it all off as, one person's problem. It's often a dynamic. That doesn't mean that person isn't making choices. Okay, you
Well,
disagree with
okay.
me.
Yeah, because I'm a CSAT too. I'm a certified sex addiction therapist. So I've done a ton of training
Okay.
on that. So I'm both,
Okay.
right? I'm a sex therapist. I'm also sex addiction. So I wear both hats. So this is where, like, first of all, abstinence is not, the model gets tricky here because it's more process addiction. But I do think that the out of control, I don't care what we call it. It doesn't need to be called addiction. Agree it's out of control behavior. It's not serving. But typically the challenges are that they've kind of slid out of their own kind of moral code or what's serving them, or they're out of alignment. And so they need, and it is coping. It's absolutely coping behavior.
Mhm.
So they need to get back in alignment with that. I don't agree that it's always relational. Sometimes I think it's really just like their own stuff. It's not necessarily, I mean, I work a lot with these guys. And actually, I think probably when I look at the different patterns of who comes in, I would imagine that the guys that you see in DC are probably a fair amount of them because there's a pretty high correlative with narcissism and
Mhm.
high powered people. And yet, kind of centering and sort of feeling not good enough, feeling,
Mhm. Yeah.
kind of it's a power exchange. It's a power over. There's a lot of like, but underneath it, it's a worthlessness sort of problem
I
that's
don't
really
disagree
at
with
play.
I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but
So it's
I do
addressing
think,
that.
yeah, but it has a relational impact. So even if it's not
Yeah.
it still impacts the relationship.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. For
so I
sure.
think you still always have to also look at the dynamic that it's created, or how
Yes.
it gets reinforced. So I don't disagree with one thing you're saying. I completely agree. And so much of what, our coping mechanisms are about not good enough. I mean, at the end of the day, not good enough,
Yeah.
which is
No.
so painful.
Yeah. No, sorry. I thought you meant the causation was relational. And I was saying, no, that oftentimes they're coming in with their own stuff. It definitely has like repercussions to the relationship. That is for sure. Okay. So getting back to on the sex therapy side of things, though, like talking about spontaneous desire, because I do feel like this is something I see most of my people that are coming in, I see individuals too, but a lot of couples are kind of on the older side. And I feel like this is a topic. I'm like perimenopausal. I keep thinking I'm menopausal and keep getting pushed back, not yet. But the conversation around spontaneous desire, and my friends are all having it of like, where did it go? Like it's
Yep.
gone, you know?
Yep.
And, kind of that concept has left the building, right? Everything is like, so talk about sort of what's misleading about spontaneous desire, because I'm curious to hear kind of your perspective.
Yeah. So my perspective is that although we have been trained to believe that spontaneous desire is the right kind of desire, it's the best kind of desire. And once you lose it, it's never, ever, ever coming back, I think isn't true. I think that what's happened is this is where, I was on Dr. Kelly Casperson's podcast, I don't know, 2 years ago. And the title of the episode is Hollywood Ruined Us. And I truly believe that Hollywood has ruined us around sex, because you never see, anything occur that they have scheduled the sex, or that they've negotiated something, or that they're fitting it in a, nap time, during nap time of their toddlers, or that they're reaching for lube. I mean, you just never see any of it, right? And of
Yeah.
course I get why. I mean, I'm not, I get it. It definitely makes for a better movie and a, better rom-com for sure. But what's happened is we then believe that at the age of 65, we've been married for 30 years, that we should be ripping each other's clothes off, outside the bedroom. We can't even get up the stairs, before we're ripping each other's clothes off, right? And
Right.
so that's the model. And
Yeah.
so most of us walk around saying, what's wrong with us? That's not the way my relationship looks. And not only at 65, but it didn't look that way at 45 or 35. It looked that way for 3 months when we were 22. And so you spend your whole life feeling like you're doing it wrong and that something is inherently wrong either with the relationship or with the sex or with me or with you. And so you're always looking to blame something. And again, I think this is where you've got to bring in some acceptance of what does change. Attraction changes, our ability to be spontaneous changes when we're overscheduled for every single thing. Somehow you think you're just going to immediately randomly think about sex, and then actually your partner's going to be right there waiting, and
Right.
you don't
And that
have the
they're on the same agenda and that they've got all the same thoughts and ideas about timing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, at the moment, and the kids are out and there's it's just not as common. The other myth I think is, and this one always makes me somehow feel good, is that even what we called spontaneous desire before and spontaneous sex before, was it really all that spontaneous? I mean, what was cute underwear for back in, the 90s in
Yeah.
college? What was when you knew you wanted to, hook up with the guy at the fraternity party that you've been flirting with for 3 weeks? What did you do? You shaved your legs. Everybody shaved their legs. You might not have shaved them Monday through Friday, but you're definitely shaving them,
Right.
Friday morning, right? You always were planning little bits around it to make sure, you wore the cute outfit or the cute underwear or whatever. And so that isn't totally spontaneous when you were sort of plotting how you wanted to look and
Yeah.
feel for the night.
It's a form of
So
scheduling, like, really.
thank you for using that word. That word is like a four-letter word in sex therapy. They hear schedule that, mostly the women are usually, depending if they have ADHD, maybe not so, but often the women are the ones who kind of like the structure and the scheduling because it makes the household run better. And you say the word schedule, two words, schedule sex, and, there's groans and there's actually what
Right.
I'm
One
always
more
shocked
thing.
about. Yeah, no, it's refusal. I
Mhm.
won't do that. And, like, that's the end of the story, and I'm pretty hard on my, clients, and I'll be like, "Nah, you just gotta get over it. Sorry. I'm not gonna go with that." I mean, not at the first session or the second session, but if we're into the work,
Yeah.
I'll try to figure out what that's about, but I'll say, "So, let's look at what you do schedule. Your personal trainer, your lunch, with a friend who's in town. You schedule what matters to you. And what message is it to your partner if you refuse to schedule sex? So don't call it that. Call it a sexy date, sexy time. But, I put everything on my calendar. And so when I refuse to do that for my partner, I am saying, you don't matter to me. Our sexual relationship doesn't matter to me. Because if it does, even though it's not my first desire that we're at this point where that's what we're doing, I want you to know that this matters to me.
And I find too that even though, yes, it's time that's blocked out and it feels a little like, okay, it's on the calendar, some people feel a little bit of dread heading into that. But for the most part, it takes the responsibility off usually at least one person, but sometimes both people. At least it's blocked out. Something happens. It's like dates have always been scheduled. So yeah, I'm a fan of it. I think it's a good idea. I think that sex doesn't just happen when you're in a longer term relationship very often. There are some exceptions. They're not really typically in our offices because
That's true too.
they're doing just fine. But also, and I don't know if this is going to get worse as AI picks up, but it's weird because AI is supposed to help us be more productive. But I don't know if being more productive is actually going to eat up more of our like puttering time or discretionary time. But, it's just, it's like Europe looks at us like, what is wrong with you Americans? It's like we're so obsessed with productivity. And I feel like as we assign everything to chat and get more and more and more productive, the space where we as humans want to shift into playfulness and eroticism and sensuality is not the productivity space. And I don't feel like chat is helping. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
No,
AI.
I agree, and I think, the word play is so important. When things aren't going well sexually, sex becomes so serious. But,
Hmm.
bringing humor into sexual situations can be incredibly helpful. Sex can be funny, it can be awkward, it's really
Yeah.
messy. And, when we make it really serious, God forbid there's a sound our body made a sound that we didn't want, then everybody sort of freezes. Where if you
Yeah.
just laugh it off, then you can get through it pretty quickly. And so back to spontaneous desire, obviously the other type of desire is the responsive desire. And, the research shows that the happiest most satisfied couples with their sexual relationship, most of their sex is responsive sex. It's getting going and responding to, kissing or, listening to erotica. It doesn't just happen. But also, men know this. Men know they're not having spontaneous erections like they used to when they were 18 and 21. Many men still will have, morning erections, which is, by the way, an extremely good time to take advantage of a nice hard erection in the morning. And women are like, but I'm getting up and I've got the kids. And, again, you could set the alarm for 15 minutes earlier and you could get it in and get it done. It's like exercise. You're going to feel better after.
Yeah.
You're going to feel, more connected. But it's just this idea of how hard it is to get there. Well, do something, what my favorite thing to say is you are responsible for your own orgasm. You cannot wait around for people to just, partner to simply know exactly what to do. If A, you don't know what to do with your own body, and B, if you haven't communicated anything about what works and doesn't work. And so, you need to figure out what turns you on, what you respond to, and then do more of that for sure.
And wouldn't you say that even though a lot of people think that they had spontaneous desire, like most spontaneous desire is actually responsive too? It might be under their awareness, but they're actually, it might have been a cue, a subtle cue. It might have been a song. It might have been a scent, but it's still, I don't know, like maybe when you're 14 and the wind blows and you can get an erection, but I feel like later in life, I don't know. I really do think most of it's react.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, so why do you want to rip your college, boyfriend's clothes off? Probably
Mhm.
because you saw him across the room and you responded to how cute he is.
Mhm.
Or you were dancing and you got a whiff of his cologne and you thought, "I can't wait anymore, let's go back." Again, you're totally right. I love that you're saying this just sort of frankly, like, "Hey, what you thought was spontaneous really wasn't." But we keep using that word. "I miss the spontaneity of it," and all of that. And guess what? You know what? We all do. That's
Yeah.
okay. You
Yeah.
miss but you're not real you're missing what feels spontaneous, but there was always a cue. I think you're right. You just didn't say, "Wow, that cologne is really turning me on, and therefore I think we should go back to the room right now." You're just not aware.
And in that, it's like if you can go back, what turns you on is your responsibility and is accessible if you can think of it, right? So I don't know, like, yes, sometimes it's seeing somebody and that person literally has an effect on you. And sometimes it's you turning yourself on by the idea of what this could be. It's projection, right? So some
Yeah,
of this
or
is all,
replaying something old. I mean, you can,
Mhm.
fantasy, if you don't know what your fantasies are, and I will tell you, my goodness, I don't know if you find this, but people, you say, "What are your fantasies?" And they are like, "I don't have any," or "I don't know." And sometimes it's that they think they're wrong or bad, so they're not gonna share it, but a lot of times,
Mhm.
they literally have never allowed that space
Mhm.
at all. They've just shut it down completely. And I do think a lot of people have, even if they're passing, and again, here's where we always wanna make the distinction between fantasy and wishes.
Mhm.
You can have many fantasies that you don't actually want to do, but they serve you in your mind. And so those are even some of the best fantasies that you just hold in your mind. You may not wanna
Well,
do
because
it,
it
but
pushes you there's a little bit of, naughtiness that is pushing you to the edge a little bit, right? Because that's tantalizing, that's titillating to think about something naughty that you wouldn't actually do, right? Or something that maybe you did in your 22-year-old body, somebody you hooked up with that maybe, you don't want them now, whatever. I do think it's interesting when I'm going to age myself, but I'm like going and putting back in that old cassette, you know, of like when you are replaying past highlight moments. I think of Nagoski saying, think of peak sexual moments. And I do think, pulling elements of those moments, but actually sometimes playing those moments. And maybe that's for solo sex. Maybe it's actually for sex that's really mediocre with somebody but yeah, the function and the euphoric recall of coming into those moments again and how powerful that can be.
yeah, I think that's amazing. I mean, you gotta have a highlight reel in your mind, and, it could be a one night stand, it could be the love of your life, it doesn't matter. It's whatever serves you to turn you on. And this is
Mhm.
where, again, you have to approach yourself with non-judgment.
Mhm.
A lot of people will be like, "That guy was a total dick to me," but I keep replaying that one sexual thing. I'm like, "Well, are you with him right now? Is he being a dick to you now?" And they're like, "Of course not. That was like 20 years ago." I go, "Great. Okay, so you're not actually in it." And if
Mhm.
that sexual experience turns you on, think about it all the time. Who cares? But again, people really believe that fantasizing about someone else or another time or even
Mhm.
when you felt really sexual, thinking about a time like that is disloyal. And some people think it's cheating. And my own personal belief, I mean, if you believe that, that's fine. But I just don't believe that anything, between our ears or that we do in our brain is actually cheating. Because, if we thought that
Yeah.
murdering someone and thinking about raging against them was the same thing, then again, we'd all be in jail. We all have thoughts that, we don't ever plan on putting into action. And I think that's just part of being a human.
Well, and we're animals, and at times we see people and we think, right? We're still like, that person's attractive. There's some lustful thoughts about that person in passing. Um, and I think that is normal. I think it's normal. And I think to have some thoughts about historically what has worked in your body is good information for your relationship. It's a roadmap of what works for you, and I like it and hopefully the relationship that you're in right now can tolerate you bringing in that information.
And that's it, right? Is can the relationship tolerate that kind of honesty? And, if not, then what's that about, right? But I agree. I mean, I find that things are shifting. I do think like most men really want to please their partner. And again, I mostly work with cis hetero couples, so that's my sort of bias here because that's mostly who I see. But they wanna please their partner, but their partner won't tell them what they like
Mhm.
and don't like, and so they're kinda like, "Am I supposed to just keep guessing?" And so I do think we have to give women more permission to actually just say, "This is what I like, this is what I don't like." I don't know about you, but when I come across couples and I ask them about their communication around sex, there are some people, I mean, there are women who will come in and say, say, "So do you tell your husband what you want or whatever?" And they'll say, "I've never, ever said a word about what I like, what I don't like." And I'll say, "Well, what about in the moment? Do you say things like right there, or, can you do it a little harder?" And they say, "Never." And it
What?
breaks my heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really heartbreaking.
Well, because also it's so much pressure for, let's call it like the dominant partner. I work with a lot of queer couples and heterosexual couples too. But when one person is charged with being the initiator and the dominant partner, that's a lot of responsibility to figure it out. And if they're not given a lot of feedback, they don't know what they're doing. And so it's I think it's pressure, and it's a setup a little bit, and it's a setup for both partners to feel some anxiety and levels of dissatisfaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And, even, I mean, I'll say, if you don't feel comfortable using words like harder, softer, faster, whatever, are you at least making noises that are clear about,
Right.
and some of them will say, "No, I'm pretty silent." And
I
again,
know.
I know. And
Can you do red flag, like green
yeah,
flag, like something?
right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, attach a number to good and bad, or, faster or slower, or whatever you need to do, but feedback
It's like you're having sex, but
matters.
you're not talking about it. That's so frustrating. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back to talk about the influences that are invisible, that are on libido. A quick pause here to share something that I've been working on that I think you will really appreciate, especially if you've ever felt confused or disconnected from your sexual desire. It's a self-paced course that I created for women who want a better understanding of their sexual desire, especially if it's felt confusing, inconsistent, or hard to access. A lot of us are taught that desire should just be there, effortless, spontaneous, always on, but that is not the reality for most people. And when it's not, it can leave you feeling frustrated or like something is wrong with you. If you've ever felt turned on one day and completely disconnected the next, or if you've struggled to say what you really want sexually, if you're both excited by the idea of vibrant sex and hesitant about what that even looks like, this course is for you. Desire is complex. It lives in your brain just as much as your body. And in this course, I guide you through the understanding of your unique relationship to it without pressure, shame, or performance. You'll get short videos and guided worksheets to help you map out your personal erotic template, identify what turns you on and off and what shuts you down, understand the blocks that might be getting in your way, reconnect with your body, and you'll explore your sexual self with more confidence and curiosity. You can go at your own pace. You don't need to want more sex. You just need to want to know yourself better. So if this resonates, then head on over to pleasureproject.us and learn more and enroll in the course. Now back to the episode. Okay. So we were just talking about some of the historical influences that absolutely weigh in. And I think it's so interesting because many couples, and this is not just couples in their 20s, right? Teens definitely have trouble talking about sex, but we're talking about couples in their 50s and 60s that they're having sex, but they're not actually talking about it. And the sexual experience, I think it matters in terms of skill, but it also matters in terms of attachment and in terms of communication, right? In terms, I would say how you find couples, how satisfied they feel in their sexual experience. So yes, some of it is, can you give me guidance to your body? But also, how connected do we feel during this experience?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, intimacy and sex are very interrelated. They are not always super interrelated. I think there are people who have sex that may not, feel intimate, but this is where, we look at this kind of balance between safety and, I don't like saying danger. I never know what the opposite, how to talk about it, like Esther Perel does, but with, I don't know, intrigue or uncertainty is sort of how I
Mm-hmm.
think about it, safety and uncertainty. And
Mm-hmm.
so you absolutely need emotional safety to build a very strong sexual connection. But if you only have emotional safety and zero kind of uncertainty, meaning if that person is available 24 hours a day and they're in their sweats. I mean, that's why COVID was such a
Right.
really difficult time for sex. A, because your kids were around constantly, but also because your partner was around. And I always say missing someone is an amazing aphrodisiac.
Mhm.
Missing someone, that idea of sort of pining for them or the uncertainty of when you're going to see them again. And so I do think kind of inserting some uncertainty, even if it's sort of through play, like, well, am I going to see you later? You could say, I don't know. Are you? Or like, when will you be home? I don't know. Maybe I'll surprise you and come home early. Like, even that can kind of shift things. Or, the whole idea of sort of meeting your partner at a bar and pretending like you don't know each other. That inserts this intrigue and
Mhm.
uncertainty and how's it going to go, where in long-term couples, I mean, the script feels so set for a lot of couples. First kiss here on couch, then move upstairs, start in missionary, then we go to oral sex, then I come, then we go back to, doggy style. And it's boring. So I'll often just say, like, even mix up the order. If you like what you
Right.
like, that's great. And people usually find something that works well enough and then they just do it ad nauseum. So
Mhm.
again, if it works for you, great. But at least be willing to do it in another room or,
Right.
do it on vacation. Vacation sex is great. Hotel sex is amazing because you
Always
can't
better.
worry about the dishwasher that, wasn't
Yes.
loaded correctly and how much you hate your husband because he put the forks in, upside down, right?
Right.
Which, by the way, I don't, there's something about how people load the dishwasher
It's
that is very
so
triggering.
so true, right? And it's like, yeah, there's just something about routine that has to happen in long-term relationships to help you function. But man, it's a deal desire killer for sex,
Yes,
right?
wah,
So
wah, wah.
anything different, anything
Literally
like
anything.
do it in a different place, do it at a different time, wear something different, approach different, talk different, ask for something different. I don't know, anything different. The mind is like, what? What? You know?
Right. And that's the thing. And so, if nothing else, if you just took away from this episode, insert new here,
Hmm.
new anything,
Yeah.
literally anything. Um, you know, and, people think like, everything is such an effort. And look, I do think couples really struggle to come up with ideas. But again, as we're talking about ChatGPT, like, that's a great thing to ask ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And then then you don't even have to say, hey, I want to try, standing sex. If you're nervous about saying that because that feels really vulnerable and you're worried your partner's going to be like, well, that's stupid, then, have ChatGPT say it. And then you can say, they said this would be wonderful. So you often can
Yeah.
work on your sexual relationship in the displacement if you're anxious about saying things. That's why I love these kind of sexual activity lists where
Hmm.
it's, yes, no, maybe.
Hmm.
And you have each partner fill them out. It has 100 different sexual acts or ideas.
Hmm.
Each of you fills that out separately, so there's no shame. And then when you're talking about it, again, you're reading off a piece of paper.
I've done that before where sometimes you'll do like a menu, like you'll co-create like a sexual
Yes.
menu with clients. And I find that they are giggly while you're doing it. Like they're kind of like, I've never really said this out loud, but this kind of turns me on. And, we don't do this, but I might want to, or this particular thing would be really thrilling for me. And this is a little edgy for me. And so you're kind of co creating, negotiating what they might like to try. And they're like teenagers sitting there. I'm just like, oh my God,
Yeah,
you
and they're
guys.
just looking for where it's a Venn diagram, you're
Hmm.
just looking for the
Yeah.
overlap. You don't start with something that is, extreme kink that only one person wants to do. That is not going to work. But start with where there's some overlap or even just a willingness to try something. Doesn't mean it'll work. Doesn't even mean you'll like it. You can change your mind and be like, I'm not really into this. I thought I might be, but I'm not. But I love the phrase willingness to try when it comes to sex. I think it's so important, you know, to say to yourself, I'm not really in the mood, but I think I'll be willing to try and, give it 10 minutes. And if after 10 minutes I'm still not interested, fine. But you can't sit there for 10 minutes. You have to do something. You have to turn yourself on. You have to kiss. You have to hug. You have to do eye gazing, something to see
Yeah.
if you can spark something. And most people, once they get going, they're fine. They will tell
Yeah.
you, I enjoyed it. Now, I still think they could often enjoy it more if they were inserting newness, intrigue, mystery, whatever, more
Yeah.
eroticism. But it's the getting started because people are waiting around for the, lightning bolt that says, now I'm in the mood. It
Yeah.
ain't coming.
It's sort of
It ain't coming.
that ambivalent, like, I'm not a hard no, but I feel sorta meh about it, and so I'm kinda, like, waiting for it to feel like it's gonna be really fun, that I really wanna join this party, and so, yeah, it's like, okay, and then that tipping point happens, especially I find that I hear that more from women where they have a slower on-ramp, and so, 15 minutes in, they're like, "Okay, alright, yeah, alright, now I'm" more blood flow, more sexually relevant information. Alright, I'm ready to proceed, you
Right. I
know?
mean, the whole idea that desire has to come before arousal really hurts people in long term marriages or, couples. You can absolutely have arousal first, and desire will often follow. Not
Mhm,
every single time, but often.
yeah. Okay, so let's talk about accelerated resolution therapy because I'm new to that term. Yeah, tell me a little bit about it and how it works.
Okay, so ART or ART is an evidence based treatment modality that uses rapid eye movement and voluntary image replacement to change the way the brain stores distressing images or memories, and then the corresponding negative sensations that show up in the body. So most people have heard of EMD.
I do that.
Okay, so EMDR is much more well known, but art is similar in that it's, trying to, again, change the way the brain processes and holds on to these memories that either were traumatic or experiences that were, unpleasant or painful or, whatever. And so what I have found is a lot of sexual issues. So people that come to me for sex therapy, I end up doing a lot of art with because it really gets at the brain and the body in a way that talking about things doesn't always get to. And so I have found art to be the absolute most amazing thing I've ever done clinically. It is so exciting. The rapid change I see, the healing I see in front of my eyes in 60 or 90 minutes is totally magical, even though art is 100% based in science. It's based on the fact that when we do bilateral eye movement, we are replicating REM sleep where memories are reconsolidated. And we're just doing that consciously and intentionally. So we have control over how to change those images to then store. And it's been revolutionary. I've worked on many different, sexual health kind of related things. So it's really good for sexual assault, getting rid of sexual assault trauma. It could be, years and years of childhood sexual abuse. It can be that you can work on it if you got exposed to porn too early and you feel like that's caused a lot of damage. It works on religious trauma that's related to sex, whether it's actual someone in the church abusing you or simply the
Shame.
the shame. Oh my god, it works so well on sexual shame. It
Mhm.
works with erectile dysfunction and if you process all those terrible experiences where your penis failed you,
Yeah.
which now causes a ton
Anticipatory.
of
Yeah.
anticipatory
Dysfunction.
anxiety. You
Yeah.
process those out, you
Hmm.
change the images, you see it the way you want it to happen, the way you wish it had happened, where, you've got this erection that's the hardest thing in
Hmm.
the world and you last as long as you want, and you store that in the brain, their anxiety disappears and they totally
Interesting.
believe that they can have an
So
erection for as long as they want.
with EMDR, we look at negative cognitions and then we replace it. So with art, do you work in images? Is that sort of the
So art works in
premise?
images and sensations. That
Okay.
being said, it 100% works on like limiting beliefs, things like that, but it does it through seeing images. So it works on probably every single thing that EMDR would work on. It just goes about it a little bit differently. So I don't want to hear your thoughts. I want you to be seeing images in your mind. There's almost no talking with art, and so when you're doing these, rapid eye movement, you're seeing images in your brain, but you're not actually saying anything. And so for trauma survivors, it's a breath of fresh air because they don't have to talk about it yet again. I don't even have to know what you're working on for it to be successful. I like to know what you're working on because then it helps me be attuned to you and make better suggestions about if things aren't going perfectly and I think you need to tweak something.
Hmm.
But, I mean, I've had one of the most moving experiences is when I had someone working on a sexual assault and she was literally about to jump out of her skin. She was having, close to a panic attack when she was imagining this very violent sexual assault. But the distress only lasted about 2 to 3 minutes, and after 2 or 3 minutes, using those rapid eye movement that calm the sensations, she was totally calm, and what had been this terrible image and sensation of someone, the perpetrator choking her, within a few minutes, she literally said to me, where is he? Like, I can't even see him in the room anymore. I don't understand. Where did he go? And I said, your brain just got rid of him. It's not
That's
necessary.
that's amazing too. That's also the value of exposure therapy, right? If you can tolerate it in a safety, I mean, that's the eye movement. Um, I imagine too is like that's part of the EMDR is tolerating it in a safe environment, sitting through with your sympathetic nervous system being calm. That's incredible. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
so
again, it
much of
doesn't last very long. It only lasts a
mhm,
couple minutes. So I
mhm. It's
it's
brief.
not it's very brief, and I mean, you can have someone who is having a panic attack almost, and within 3 minutes they're laughing and smiling and
Mhm,
yawning, because when they
mhm.
yawn, they're very relaxed. Their, rest and digest system is, back in charge. So I always love to see them yawn because I know we're headed in the right direction because they're very relaxed. They're not holding it all in their body. And so it also works on libido and marriage satisfaction. I had a woman who was incredibly angry and irritated with her husband around a lot of different things. They hadn't had intercourse in 6 years. She felt zero you know, libido. She just thought, I don't care if we ever, have sex again. We did a session where she worked through some of her annoyances. She went home. She said she was so desirous of her husband, was so in love with him that they had sex for the first time in 6 years. And it was amazing. And then the week after, she just loved her husband more. She literally felt more love toward him. We did one session on that.
Yeah, so moving some of those blocking beliefs to just be able to access what that previous affection that was there and that desire.
Yeah. It's often just hidden by other things. It's somewhere in there, but it's been covered up with resentment and anger and a dysregulated nervous system. And you just have to teach the body that you can think about the way you want things to be. And then, the brain doesn't need a factual story, it needs a good story. And so I often will say to people,
That's sex therapy right there.
yeah. you know? Just give it a good story and it's like, "Ooh, let's hang on to that one." But
Mhm.
we call it the director's scene. You direct the way you want it to be. And so your direct scene, it can't be that you're having like sexual pain and then your director scene is we had mediocre sex and it didn't hurt as much. I'm like, "Do you think your brain wants to hold on to that story?" No. You should be seeing fireworks and it's the most pleasurable thing in the world and you're doing it on a beach in Tahiti. Store that in your brain. Your brain will love that story.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like amazing what the brain can do when it chooses to. And we see this, right? When we're in fantasy or early on in relationships, when we're courting somebody and we make up all sorts of stories about them and us and whatever, we have that capability. So it's a frame that we can choose. So we can choose to our own power as well. Um,
Absolutely.
okay. So just anything that you want to mention that you have coming up that listeners would want to know about?
Well, I think at the moment I do events. I do an event called Vino and Vulvas where
Mm.
I can either come into your home, in person or virtually. And I ask people to invite, a group of their friends, their book club, their college roommates. And I show up with, vibrators and I find out their ages and what they're really interested in. And then I tailor, a 2 hour sort of talk around what matters to them. And it's really fun because they get to see that many of them struggle with the same things and
Mhm.
most people around sex thinks they're the only one, they must be the only person who's struggling with this, so it really normalizes things. And then I just provide really important psychoeducation, and sometimes the group I'm with, I was with a group of 35-year-olds. I held up a 3D printed clitoris. They had no idea what it
My
was,
gosh.
zero idea, and these are highly educated women. And I thought, man, do I need to be here? So that's a really fun thing I do. Sometimes host Ask a Sex Therapist Anything Zooms. That's really been fun. But my practice now specializes in art. And so if people are, wanting to experience art, whether it's a regular trauma, PTSD, depression, or sex related issues, trying art is just a great way to get unstuck when you've tried lots of other treatment modalities that just aren't working well enough for you.
Great. Okay. And they can find you online on Instagram at Brooke Bralove Psychotherapy. So
Exactly.
we will link all this in the show notes. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much.
Hey, it's Dr. Jenn. Thanks for tuning in. If something in today's episode resonated with you, please take a moment to leave us a review and drop a comment. We'd love your feedback. It really helps support the podcast and keeps this content coming your way. If you're looking to dive deeper into pleasure, connection, and self discovery, check out my Pleasure Circle course, where we explore these topics in a fun, guided way. I also write a weekly newsletter with articles, insights, and inspiration to help you live a more connect pleasure filled life. And if you want to connect with me directly, you can message me on Instagram at Dr. Jenn Kennedy or email me at drjennkennedy@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you.